It is the morning after the national championship game, and I am one proud papa. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. This is Scarbo Knows, and you may or may not know that I have one son, my older son, Kaiser, who is a student at the University of Florida. My younger son, Cannon, his roommate in Gainesville, is a student at Santa Fe College who's about to transfer to UF. And I got a firsthand description. I got video. I got sound. I got emotion from the streets of Gainesville last night from my sons enjoying a national championship in men's college basketball, their favorite sport, the sport I coached them in. Went not very well, but I did get to coach them when they were very young, that I watched them play in high school. And it was a special feeling last night watching the Gators beat Houston 65-63 to clinch that national championship, and then hearing the joy in my sons' voices as they participated in the celebration. So a great day in the Skarbinski household, a great day in the SEC, and I can't think of anyone better to break down what happened last night in that championship game in which Florida beat Houston at its own game, defense and toughness, what the SEC did in this tournament, won 24 games, just unbelievable performance across the board. And there's a new member of the SEC coaching family, Bucky McMillan, from right here in Birmingham at Samford University. But he's not the first Samford coach to go directly to the SEC. Our guest today paved that trail, had incredible success at LSU. There you see, he's an SEC legend. Former coach at LSU, former coach at Samford, one of my favorite people in the basketball world, John Brady. John, how are you today?
Doing well, Kevin. Glad to be with you, man. I appreciate the kind words as always.
Well, you put Samford basketball on the map before most people knew where Samford was or what it was all about. In fact, you see there's a Samford basketball behind me.
Right.
Your right-hand man and your successor, Jimmy Tillett, his wife gave that to my son Kaiser when he was 1 year old at his first college basketball game. That's a special possession of mine. So, John, first of all, let's talk about last night. Let's talk about what we saw in that national championship game, because if you told most people going into that game that the final score would be 65-63, how many people would have said Kelvin Sampson is the oldest coach now to win a national championship?
Well, they had their two best guards. They held them to 5 for 20 from the floor, and if you'd have told Kelvin Sampson that, I'm sure before the game, he'd say, I think we got a winner here. But, I think you got to start with two coaches that know how to coach a team. And, Kevin, my background, I'm all about defending and rebounding. I think those are things of effort that players can control every night. You can control the effort you give. But even if you get a quality shot, sometimes it's not going to go in. And I think shooting comes and goes. I think Alabama, certainly demonstrated that in going 25 for 51. And in the next game against Duke, they can't shoot it. So I think shooting comes and goes, but I think defending and rebounding is a constant that the players can give. You have to demand that as a coach. And I think both those teams defend well and they rebound well. And I think that's what Houston got them to where they are. They're a streaky shooting team. They don't score a lot of points, but certainly you better be a tough-minded offensive team if you're going to play against that type of defense and that type of rebound. They're the best help and recovery team I've seen all year in college basketball.
Now, you've seen a lot of SEC basketball as the color analyst on the LSU Sports Radio Network.
Right.
One of the things that I think people underestimated about Florida or got lost when they evaluated Florida, they were so dazzled by the offense, by their ability to score points in bunches, by Walter Clayton's incredible shot-making ability. And we saw that on full display in the Elite Eight against Texas Tech and then in the national semifinals against Auburn. But I don't think people realized the toughness that Florida possessed, the ability to lock you down on defense. And we saw it in both of those Final Four games. Auburn's offense in the first half in that national semifinal, I think they think they averaged 1.43 points per possession. It doesn't get much better than that.
Right.
Turned up the heat in the second half, and they did the same thing to Houston.
Right. And the other thing Florida did too, they made it a difficult night for Houston's best scorer, Cryer. Houston doesn't score it well anyway. And then when Cryer goes 6 for 18, they make it difficult for him. He never got into a rhythm of play. And I thought I thought that's one of the keys to the Auburn team. You upset Broom, don't let him get in a rhythm of play. They were able to do that the second half. That's why they were able to beat them. They did the same thing with Cryer, held him for 6 for 18. He got 19, but certainly he had a bad shooting night. And I think that was one of the reasons Houston was never to get in a rhythm of play, because it was difficult for their best player to ever find his niche. And I think that's a credit to coaching in Florida. Anytime, Kevin, you can defend aggressively without fouling and then go rebound the ball and limit teams to one shot, I think that's all about coaching. And I think these two teams did as good a job as that as any two teams I've seen all year long.
John, let's break down that last Houston possession. They're down 2. They've got 19 seconds or so. They go to a timeout. They draw up a play. I don't think you can defend a play better than Florida did. They made it tough on when the Cryer got the ball in his hands out on the wing. First of all, they pushed him out on the floor, caught it probably deeper than he wanted to. He had a notion to go to the sideline and then the baseline. Thomas Houck cut him off with a hard hedge. And then Martin, with his physicality, his length, he made it a tough pass back to the top to Emmanuel Sharp. And then Clayton kind of fell asleep a little bit on the baseline when Sharp came through the screen, but he closed hard. And maybe the capper of all, when the ball's loose, and Sharp was smart enough to know if he touches it, it's a travel and it's a turnover.
Right.
So he walls off Clayton, and only one player went to the floor. And Houston, which is known for these drills at practice, they dive on the floor for loose balls. It was Alex Condon for Florida who went down and got that ball and sealed the game. Is that a clinic in defending a final play there? And did you have any issues with the play that Houston chose to run?
Well, certainly you and I aren't privy to what went on in the timeout, so I don't know what they call it. But I'll go back even another step. The last 2 Houston possessions were not very good. I've always thought in those situations, when the game is on the line, you need to call something specific for one player that you want to at least touch the ball on that offensive end. Now, if the play doesn't work, then you go into a manufacturer mode and maybe ball screen, pick and pop, drive the ball to create a foul situation. But I was a little disappointed, and I don't know what Houston was trying to do, particularly the last possession, that they didn't have something specifically called for Cryer to get a touch. And I'm not talking about put the ball in his hands. I think it's easy to guard a guy when he has the ball in his hands because he's going to either drive it or come off a screen. I like him away from the ball and setting multiple picks, particularly on the weak side, and bring him off the weak side to try to get a shot. And I was a little disappointed Houston didn't execute something specifically for him. On the other hand, you've got to give Florida credit. Those last 19 seconds to defend as they did without fouling. And I said that while ago, I alluded to that while ago. Good aggressive defense without fouling is all about coaching. And I think in that particular instance, that Florida did a wonderful job. And I wouldn't be surprised if Florida didn't work on defending with a 20 or 25-second shot clock without fouling. I think you work on those things in practice as Houston to get a specific shot for a specific player when the clock is winding down in the end of the game, when the game is on the line. That's the only thing I would have done differently, possibly. And I think the last 19 seconds, it looked like to me there wasn't something specifically called. They were just going to try to manufacture a shot and hope it goes in. And I've always wanted to get the ball in my best players' hands, particularly in that type of situation.
It's interesting. Sharp hit a huge 3 in that comeback on Saturday that Houston made against Duke. And it was a similar set. It was on the wing rather than at the top. But he gave a shot fake, and the defender flew by. He did one dribble sidestep and hit the 3. He had time to do that with Clayton flying at him. I wonder if he rushed a little bit, if he panicked a little bit, or if Clayton closed out so hard, so fast, and on his shooting hand side as he flew by. If Sharp didn't panic a little bit there, because he did have time to give him that shot fake, let him fly by, and then get an open look at that three.
That's a good point. But I think when you look at that again, he was already committed to leaving the ground before he saw him closing out. I think the timing of that was just ironic in favor of Florida, that he committed to shooting the open shot and was in the shot motion as Clayton closed on him really good. Then when he got to the top of his shot, he said, uh-oh, he's going to block this. So he dropped it on the ground, and then nobody could get on it. And the biggest guy on the floor at 6'11" dives on the floor and secures the victory. So I think he was already committed to the shot before he noticed Clayton was closing on him that hard and that fast.
How much do you appreciate this Florida team? They're the first national champion in a long time that did not have a single top 100 recruit on the roster. Now, you coached guys at every stop that weren't big names. You also coached stars. You had 3 SEC Players of the Year, Stromile Swift, Brandon Bass, Big Baby Davis. You had 4 SEC Freshmen of the Year. So you had some big-time players at LSU. But these Florida guys really developed. They all came from, or a number of them came from mid-majors. The 3 guards certainly did. How much do you appreciate the development process? Because you know that better than most, that it's not just how good they are when they get there, it's how good are they when they leave.
That's a great point. And that's why I've always said, since this transfer portal is so critical now to the way teams have to build a team in relation to transfers, the portal, NIL, all of these things that make it so attractive to leave now if things aren't going right at that particular school. I think the evaluation process is critical. I think you can turn it quick. Missouri was 0-18, then they wound up being the 5th or 6th best team in the league in 1 year by flipping it in the portal. They hit on the right guys. Or you can have to restock and reload and don't evaluate well in the portal, and it can go the other way quickly too. So I think the portal evaluation is critical in terms of sustaining winning. We used to say, well, I got 2 seniors this year. I'm gonna sign 3 freshmen and develop them. I got some guys coming back. They're gonna be there and they're gonna stay. Now it's like a junior college. You're recruiting every year to replenish and restock, and that's why the evaluation that each staff goes through to get the right players. Sometimes you get lucky. I've been lucky in recruiting. We didn't think Daryl Mitchell was that good, and he wound up being, pretty good for the old Tigers. So I think the portal's key in how you evaluate who fits. And I think the thing in the portal that bothers me a little bit is I don't know how much time they really spend. They look at the evaluations of these players in terms of analytics, and they try to project what they may do. But how do you know about what's inside of that young man and his competitive nature and what drives him and what makes him want to be great? And I think sometimes that may be lost in the evaluation process because of the analytics they use to project what a player could be. I still got to talk to that young man and look in his eyes and ask him some pinpointed questions about what he believes it takes to win in order to really be totally sold on the young man.
John, how proud were you, and did you take some satisfaction in what the state of Alabama did this season across the board in basketball? And I've talked about this incessantly for the last couple of months.
And obviously, I've read it. I've read it.
I've been a cheerleader for basketball in this state for a long time.
Absolutely.
And to see what Samford and North Alabama and Troy and South Alabama and UAB and Alabama State and, of course, Auburn and Alabama and Jack State, what they did is pretty extraordinary. 9 20-win teams out of the 10 D1 teams in the state, 8 postseason teams, 4 in the NCAA, 4 in the NIT. Really should have been 5 in the NIT. South Alabama obviously got hosed there. And you were here when basketball wasn't at that level. You helped build it, though. You helped put, as I said earlier, Samford on the map. Do you take a little bit of satisfaction? You've got so many friends here still from your days at Samford.
Well, yeah, I do, and I think a lot of it goes back to the coaches you hire, and Bruce Pearl's something else now. He's in a class by himself. I love Bruce to death. He reminds me of the coach who's always out of breath. If you watch him on the side, he's always taking a deep breath to say the next thing. And then what Nate Oates has done at Alabama is incredible. It's probably not the way I would be committed to playing it, but he's committed to what he's doing and he does it, and that's the way he's going to play. And I think that's one of the reasons for their success. They recruit to that. North Alabama, I'm not familiar with that guy, but what a job he did. Andy Kennedy, we know he's a winner from way back. He averaged 20 wins a game at Ole Miss for 7 or 8 years. So he knows what he's doing. And then my man, Bucky McMillan. I mean, Bucky used to come to our camps when I was at Samford. He grew up there on that campus going to Samford University basketball camps. And I remember recruiting him. I didn't think he was quite good enough for what we needed. At that time, we had Pixley and Davenport and some really good guards. And he went and played for Dwayne, which was a perfect setting for him. And he did well there. And then he came to Samford and unprecedented success. It's incredible what he did. And he gets the Texas A&M job. And, Samford's got to be proud of that. And they've lost a good coach and they've lost a good guy. And I remember when Martin hired him, he asked me what I thought, and I really thought Dwayne Rebo being there was a good cover for him. Having an experienced Hall of Fame coach there with him. Uh, but what Bucky did and the way he played, the style he's committed to, I think that will translate easily into Texas A&M. But the key to it is how they recruit it, how they fix a team that's losing 8 guys, and how they get into that portal and see what kind of success they can have out of that.
Well, since you brought up Bucky, obviously, I wanted to ask you about that transition. Some people might say that's an awfully big leap from the Southern Conference to, and it was the Trans-America Athletic Conference when you were at Samford.
Less than the Southern, actually.
From the TAC to the SEC,
TAC.
you made that leap, and now Bucky's going from the Southern, from the SoCon to the SEC. What were some of the things that opened your eyes? Maybe you weren't ready for, or you hadn't anticipated. And you had friends in the SEC, obviously Richard Williams, and you go way back. You had been in the SEC as an assistant at Mississippi State. So it wasn't like you were walking in blind, but describe some of the differences between the mid-major and the high major level that you made that leap to.
I always thought what we were doing was sound and it could operate on any level. The way we try to coach and the way we try to prepare and what we tried to instill in the players in terms of their toughness and confidence and those type of things. Those intangibles there I thought were already in place. The biggest thing we had to do was clean up the team that was there and then recruit. And I knew we had to up our recruiting, get it to another level in order to be successful in that league. And that was the biggest concern for me. That's why I hired Butch Pierre. I thought Butch Pierre from Louisiana, played at Mississippi State. I coached him at Mississippi State, and I knew he was an outstanding recruiter. So I hired Butch, and then I hired Kermit Davis. I had to have good help. And Kermit's been one of my dear friends. I was a GA for his father at Mississippi State. We go way back. So when I got Butch and Kermit in place, I knew we had a chance. And it just so happens, Kevin, they had this guy, Stromile Swift from Shreveport, Louisiana. And that was the first year we struggled, but we brought Stromile in there. And in our third year, and here's what people don't understand, they forget. And I told they honored that team during the year this year, 25th anniversary of that 2000 SEC champion Sweet 16 team. Well, Stromile, that team was so good, people forgot we were in our third year of probation with only 9 scholarship players. That team won 27 games and won the league outright. And we get beaten the Sweet 16 by Wisconsin. So people forgot, that we were on probation. That team was so good. But Stromile Swift, you get a couple of guys like him, he changed the whole trajectory of the program. Now, we were coaching it right, and we were defending and rebounding and running nice offense, doing all the things that you need to do in order to win at that level on a consistent basis. But certainly you need some talented players. And if you don't have a pro or two in the SEC, or at least a couple of first-team all-league players, then and now, you can't finish in the top 4 or 5 unless you have some really good players. And Stromile started that for us, and we were able to continue that for several years after.
Now, coaches like yourself who coached in the SEC back in the day like to remind people that SEC basketball didn't just start this year. I had your buddy Wimp Sanderson on as a
Oh my
guest
goodness.
last week, and of course he
Yeah,
was all about the 1980s when it was a pretty strong league at the time as well.
sure.
How much better? And Brendan, let's look at, and this really jumped out at me, John. Let's look at this good on good graphic as we talk about where the SEC is right now. Houston lost 5 games all year, 3 of them to SEC teams. They lost to
Hmm.
Auburn, they lost to Alabama, they lost to Auburn in Houston early in the season. Then they lost to Alabama in Las Vegas in that tournament. They, of course, took care of Tennessee in the Elite Eight, and then they lost to Florida in the championship game last night, a very close game. Florida against the rest of the 4 best teams in the league, the 4 that got to the Elite Eight, the 4 that kind of separated themselves, went 6-1. How good was the SEC this year compared to, as you said, the year 2000? You were one of 4 teams that shared the SEC title. You were part of an SEC that sent 2 teams to the Final Four. You were there with Florida, with LSU the year Florida won its first championship in 2006. How would you compare the SEC then and now?
Well, I think from a top to bottom with 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, the depth of the league as compared to the other teams across the country was certainly the best it's ever been. The numbers alone will prove that. Uh, we the last time the SEC sent 2 teams was in '06 to the Final Four. It was LSU and Florida. Florida went on to win it. We tied Florida for the SEC championship that year, I believe. But I don't know if Florida is the best team that the SEC's ever had. I'm not so sure if a couple of Billy's teams that went back to back, how would they fare against this Florida team? Does this Florida team have 3 or 4 pros on it that Billy's team did? I think it remains to be seen. So I think the depth of the SEC was better than it's ever been. I'm not so sure the team that won it all this year was the best SEC team that has ever played it. So I do believe the top 4 or 5 teams in the SEC over the past 15 or even 20 years are as good as maybe this Florida team that won it. But I don't think the SEC had the quality of depth that it demonstrated this year with 14 teams getting in the league in the NCAA.
By the way, you sold your 2006 team a little bit short. You didn't share the regular season title. You won it outright that
Uh,
year.
I didn't want to brag.
But it was, I mean, obviously you had a great run at LSU, two SEC championships, 3 division titles, 2 Sweet 16s, an Elite Eight, a Final Four. Uh, what's your favorite memory of your time at LSU? I know a lot of people, and you, like Bucky McMillan now at Texas A&M, you weren't maybe the first choice
Oh.
to be the coach. I don't know what number you were in the pecking order, but I know you weren't number 1 originally. Uh, what did that time mean to you, and what is your favorite memory of your days as the LSU head
Well,
coach?
let me preface this whole thing by saying this that I wouldn't have ever gotten a job had Joe Dean Jr. and I not been grad assistants together for Kermit Davis's father at Mississippi State. And I got to know the Dean family when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. Joe Jr. and I became best friends. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, but my introduction to being close to that family, and then Joe Dean winds up being the AD at LSU. Uh, and we go into LSU my last year at Samford, and we beat them on their home floor, as you recall. And then about 2 weeks after that, Dale Brown resigned, and I called Mr. Dean on the phone, and I said, Mr. Dean, I want to be the next head coach at LSU. I said, you've known me a long time. I said, but I think I could do that job. I'd love to have that job. And he in his Joe Dean grapple voice, he says, John, he said, I love you like a son. He said, but I can't hire you at LSU. They want me to hire Bobby Knight, resurrect Adolph Rupp. I don't know if I can hire John Brady from Samford. I said, well, I understand, but I want you to know I'd love to have the job. Well, LSU's about to go on probation. Boom, boom, boom. Some high major guys that really had good jobs and good contracts turned it down and tried to hire Rob Evans at Ole Miss, and he turned it down. And then Joe Dean turned to me, and But had I not had that relationship with the Dean family and my friendship with Joe Dean Jr., I don't think I'd ever been on the radar had they not known me prior to me being at Samford. And I always say this everywhere I go: Joe Dean Sr. and the Dean family changed my life, and something I'll always be grateful for.
Well, the Dean family has meant so much to the state of Alabama, the state of Louisiana, to sport of basketball, and I'll forever be grateful for my friendships with Joe Jr. and Sr. for sure. Now, John, you're one of a handful of coaches. It's either 5 or 6. That's won 2 SEC championships since the year 2000.
Hmm.
Florida now is
I
one
like
of
these
a.
facts you're coming up with,
You
man.
know I'm all about the facts.
I
You know
had,
I come prepared. I bring receipts, John. You know that. I had to have listen. I had to have ammunition if I was going to keep up with you in our spirited discussions when you were the Samford coach, and then on into your days at LSU. But where is Florida now? And Brendan, if we can pop up that graphic, look at the number of national championships that schools have won since the year 2000, that year that you and Florida and 2 others shared the SEC championship. Florida is now tied with North Carolina and Duke with 3, behind only UConn, which has won 5 in that time. And you see the others, Kansas and Villanova with 2 each. And then you see a handful of schools that have won 1 each. Is Florida a blue blood, or is that a category that encompasses a lot more than national championships?
Well, certainly that number right there puts Florida in a blue blood in that cloud in that stratosphere. The issue now is Kevin, is can you sustain it with NIL revenue and transfer portal? And I think it may be a little more difficult now to sustain winning at that level than it was when you won a national championship and you were recruiting to it. And players would probably stay 3 years and then go pro, or 4 years for sure. And you could build a team as opposed to maintaining a team. So that's why I go back to my original comment with you. The transfer portal is a make or break situation. You've got to be good at it. You've got to evaluate well. You've got to understand what you need and what you need to get. And then you got to have the NIL dollars to go in there and get the player you need that can help you win right away. And I said this when this transfer portal became, I think the coach who can build a team uh, in a short period of time, a team that cares for one another, that shares the basketball, that is unselfish, that is disciplined. You got 3 months, 4 months. You get guys May, you got June, July, August, September, and boom, you got to start playing some games. You got about 3 or 4 months to mold a team to win a championship. And I think the coach that's able to do that in a shorter period of time, provided he has enough talent, is the coach that can really have a chance to do something special and have a special year.
So we focus so much on championships,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and Florida, again, winning last night, winning its 3rd as a program. And by the way, another fun fact, they are the only school in the country with 3, at least 3 national basketball championships and national football championships. How about that one? How's that for a fun fact? And my son, Kaiser, told me that Florida has won a national championship in at least one sport every year since, I think, 2010. That includes track and tennis and golf and all the things that they're good at, because they do have a well-rounded athletic program. As we kind of wrap up here, do we focus too much on championships? And how hard is it just to get to the Final Four? You know it. You did it. Auburn got there this year. Alabama got there last year. Auburn was there in 2019. 3 of the last 6 NCAA tournaments, by the way, the state of Alabama's had a Final Four team. That's pretty cool. Do people forget about the Final Four teams that didn't win a championship? Or is that something that's resonated through time for you and your 2006 LSU team?
Well, that Final Four, uh, added to my legacy at LSU. If you're going to have one, that's a good one to have. They don't forget about that. That banner's hanging in there with Dale's couple, and it'll never go away. And But to have that, you have to recruit well, you have to schedule smart, and you have to coach it good. I've always had this simple philosophy that good players and good coaching make for really good teams, and you have to have a balance of both. And if you've got to trade off one, I'd rather have really good players and just coach okay, because sometimes those guys can carry you through the moments when the coaching doesn't have an effect, and you just got to go make a play, and you got to have really good players to make a play. But the other thing about a Final Four run too is you have to be lucky a little bit. That Final Four team, we hit 4 buzzer beaters during the course of the year. We won 4 games at the buzzer. So you got to have some of that going your way. You've got to be lucky in that regard. And you've got to be fortunate to not have any major injuries either. Auburn survived a little stretch there where they had some injuries. Most teams do. But if you can stay away from injuries that are season ending of your best player or two, then you have an opportunity to go do something really significant. And that's what happened with that LSU team. Plus, people forget this as well, and this will never happen again. Our top 6 players on that Final Four team in '06, 4 from Baton Rouge, 1 from Denham Springs, which is 10 miles down the road, Daryl Mitchell from St. Martinville, which is 40 miles down the road. So our top 6 players were within 60 miles of the campus at LSU. Now, I don't know if that'll ever be done again, but certainly I was fortunate the timing of those players to come along at that particular time, and we were able to sign them all. I was fortunate in that regard to have those type of players that close to campus.
All right, John, as we get out of here, I think you will appreciate this. I'm going to show you one more visual aid from my wall back here.
Right.
My son Kaiser's first semester at Florida, actually before he started school, I made some calls, and he was able to be a manager that first summer for the Gators. Mike White was the head coach, and so he was there at 6 o'clock in the morning for those workouts. They're flipping truck tires, they're carrying cement blocks, they're doing all the things that you do in off-season conditioning. And at the end of that summer term, well, first of all, he decided that being a manager wasn't for him. He didn't want to be wiping up sweat and doing all the thankless jobs that managers do, and they are so vital to programs, as you know. But they gave him this basketball. And it's hard to see now. The Gator is worn off on the ball. This is a game-used basketball from their 2007 national championship season. So he let Dad keep it here in the home office while he's at home. He's down there in Gainesville. And I know what your daughters mean to you. And so This is another reason why today I'm a really proud dad that my sons are in Gainesville. They got to see their school and experience a national championship. And like I said, it's really a great end to an unbelievable, unprecedented SEC season. And thank you for being part of it, for wrapping it up with me, and just for being a friend and all the great conversations we've had through the years. And I hope they'll continue.
Well, Kevin, you're one of the best sports writers I've ever been around. And I knew when I was at Samford, when you were writing for the paper there, if I could get Kevin Skarbinski to come watch our team play when he's not even covering it, that would be a feather in my cap. And you came and you used to sit there and watch us play because you enjoyed our style. And I will never forget that, and always appreciative of it.
Well, again, that's a great way to wrap up what's been an unbelievable 2024-2025 basketball season. We'll be back next time with another edition of Scarbo Knows. John Brady, thank you. Brendan Martin, producer extraordinaire, thank you. And thanks to everyone for watching. We'll see you next time on Scarbo Knows.